So Lady Mary von Haast, as we know, she was the wife of Sir Julius von Haast, founder of Canterbury Museum, and he was Canterbury's first provincial geologist. And Julius was an energetic man who achieved a great deal, and we know a considerable amount about this. And the 200th anniversary of his birth was recently celebrated by a symposium with presentations about his work, and these are available on Canterbury Museum's website. But we know very little about his wife Mary Dobson, other than that she was married to Julius. She was 19 years old when she married him, and the couple were together for 24 years before Julius's sudden death in 1887. So she was only 43 years old when she became a widow. By the time of her death in 1913, Mary had spent 2/3 of her life not married to Julius, and yet we mostly know about her in connection with her husband. Mary's eldest son Heinrich published a biography of his father in 1948, and of course mentions his mother, but not often, and the biography does not discuss the family much after the death of Julius. Heinrich states that after his father's death, his mother acted as a companion to a young countess in Europe to supplement her small income. But according to probate documents, Mary appears to have actually been quite wealthy. And this is one of the many mysteries surrounding Mary, and I feel that this talk is actually going to be very much a work in progress. And here I want to acknowledge the work of fellow Haast researchers, Dr. Sasha Nolden and Dr. Simon Nathan, with whom I've had some very fruitful discussions and have just provided some nice little clues. So this talk will explore Mary's life and shed light on the question, who was she? She was born in Islington, London in January 1844 and was the eldest daughter of engineer Edward Dobson and his wife Mary Ann Luff. Mary arrived in Littleton with her mother, 2 sisters and a brother in 1851, just before she turned 7. So her father and her elder brothers were already here. The Dobson family lived in Sumner and probably had a governess, as they were some distance from the nearest school. Mary's great love was music, and by the time she was 17, she was a good pianist. Descendants remember Mary's mother as being sweet, gentle, and affectionate, but inclined to be a little fussy about neatness and the exact arrangements of things such as tea settings and personal appearances. Mary's father, Edward Dobson, who was the provincial engineer, was remembered by a granddaughter as immensely tall and always walking around the room, seemingly immersed in weighty problems, and apparently with not much time to talk to her granddaughter. Edward Dobson no doubt knew Julius Haast, who had been appointed the provincial geologist in 1861. Haast worked with Dobson on the Littleton Tunnel, and no doubt this is how Julius and Mary met. They both loved music, and despite the fact that Haast was more than twice Mary's age, the couple were engaged by the end of 1862. Haast described Mary as a clever, amiable, and sensible girl who will make a nice wife. Mary was smitten with Haast, describing him after her marriage as her great, tall, and, pardon my vanity, handsome husband. Mary was 19 when she married Julius on the 25th of June 1863 at St Mary's Church in the Heathcote Valley. Initially, the couple lived at Sumner in the Dobsons' house, but Haast was able to purchase a property from his friend William Travers for £1,500, and he named this Glückauf, which roughly translates as good luck. It's a German miner's greeting. 6 months after their marriage, the couple were in their own home, with Mary saying that we are, if possible, still happier than we were at Sumner. And this is their new home, with everything looking rather young in the garden. Despite having domestic help in the form of 2 servants, who were both German, Mary was not idle. Since her marriage, she has spent a great deal of time writing for Julius, as I fair copy his reports, she said. One of the things that Mary worked on was an article accompanying 12 pictures of alpine scenery that Haast had sent to the Royal Geographic Society. Mary revised her husband's publications throughout their married life, which would have been of great benefit to Julius, as his English was still sometimes idiosyncratic. After her marriage, Mary learned to speak German and would later add other languages to her repertoire. Heinrich von Haast, the son, commented that his father's excitable and emotional nature must have been very provoking for his mother. He recalled an incident, which has been much repeated, that when Mary had annoyed him one morning, perhaps for objecting to him reading the paper at breakfast, he picked her up and sat her on the mantelpiece, where she had to perch precariously until Julius relented and lifted her down. Mary was evidently a lively and happy young woman. Just a couple of weeks before the birth of her first child, her mother said that she was not yet half sedate enough. Heinrich Ferdinand Haast was born on the 11th of May, 1864, and Haast reported that Mary was very happy and proud of the baby, but that during the early years of her married life, Mary was plagued with ill health and suffered from what we would now know as postnatal depression. In September 1865, Mary was not at all well and went to live with her parents at Sumner for at least 3 months. The following year was more terrible still. The couple's second child, a son, was born prematurely in February and died a few hours later. Mary was said to be unwell and very weak. 4 months later, her beloved brother, George, disappeared while he was working as a surveyor on the west coast. George had been murdered by the Burgess Kelly gang on the 28th of May, 1866, but his body was not found until mid-July. Mary wrote of the distress and agony of mind caused by her brother's disappearance. At about the same time as her brother disappeared, Mary became pregnant again, and the next baby was named George Augustus to remember her beloved brother. James Leopold, who was always known as Leo, was born 16 months later, and then after a gap of nearly 2.5 years, a daughter, Eva Veronica, was born. The couple's last child, Julius Hermann, who was always known as Hermann, was born in December 1873. 3 months after Hermann's birth, Mary was seriously ill with low fever, postpartum fever. The symptoms include severe abdominal pain, fever, and general debility, and would now be treated with antibiotics. But in the 1870s, serious cases were difficult to treat. In October 1874, Mary went to Melbourne, where her parents were living at the time. And Haast wrote in January 1875 that Mary had been under careful medical treatment ever since. Heinrich later said that his mother had a severe nervous breakdown and that she went to a hydropathic establishment, which was water therapy. After 18 months, Mary was described as completely recovered, and Julius went to Melbourne to bring her home. At the end of 1875, Mary was reunited with her children. It is not known who cared for the 4 eldest children, who ranged in age from 3 to 10 years, but baby Hermann, Haast wrote, was in the country with an experienced and kind-hearted woman and thrives very well. Mary's poor health had coincided with Julius being forced to sell the family's home, Glucalf, due to some unwise investments he'd made. He'd purchased the house for £1,500, but sold it 10 years later for only £1,200. It appears that Julius was not good with money, and in the mid-1870s, Mary began teaching music so that she could earn money to give her boys a start in life. Maybe Eva didn't need a start, I don't know. Despite financial worries, Julius's career was going well. Canterbury Museum was developing, and Julius was making a name for himself. In 1875, he was awarded a hereditary knighthood by the Emperor of Austria, which entitled him to use the word von in front of his surname. And after Mary's return from Australia, family life certainly settled down, but the family did keep moving. The next family house was built on land that Haast bought on Cashel Street, but they sold that after a couple of years and took a lease at 65 Papanui Road in the building that was later the Rolleston Private Hospital. Then in 1881, they moved to Latimer House on the corner of Armagh and Madras Street. And I haven't been able to find a photo of Latimer House, but I did find this advertisement, which they must have responded to and taken the lease. So the house contains 23 rooms with every convenience, gas and water being laid on. It's eminently suited for a large family or as a boarding house. And Heinrich remembered the rambling two-storey building as perfect for the family, with lots of rooms, lawns, and a garden. A large drawing room had a Bechstein grand piano, portraits of Beethoven and Mozart, along with John Gully paintings, and a painting done by the artist Nicolas Chevalier based on Haast's sketch that he'd made when he was travelling over Haast Pass in 1863. And this painting is now part of the Alexander Turnbull collection. So it was obviously a very nice room. And the dining room featured a upright piano, which Mary dragged into the drawing room if she wanted to play duets with her friend Julia Wilding or her son Heinrich. The family had 2 servants, which meant that Mary could practice her music in the morning and in the afternoon visit or entertain friends. And Julius and Mary were a sort of centre of culture in Christchurch. They hosted famous musicians who were visiting Christchurch, along with scientists such as Dr. Otto Finch from Bremen, and mountaineers such as the Reverend William Green and his Swiss guides, and also Dr. Robert von Lendenfeld and his wife Anna, who had made the first ascent of Hochstetter Dome near Aoraki Mount Cook. It is evident that Mary had a mind of her own, even during the early days of her marriage when she was relatively young. In 1865, Julius recounted to his friend Joseph Hooker of Kew Gardens the story of how he'd fallen out with his friend William Travers. You may remember that's who he'd bought the original house from. Travers was an intelligent man and very enthusiastic about natural science, but Travers was not well liked by the close-knit Canterbury elite and was socially isolated. As Haast recounted, "Of course, I could not compel my wife to make a friend of Mrs. Travers and her daughter, but we could not invite people to our house because we did not like to offend the Travers by not asking them or by upsetting our other friends and making them uncomfortable by forcing them to meet the Travers." When Haast's colleague, Dr. James Hector, came to Christchurch, Haast decided to invite people interested in science to Gluckhouse so they could meet Hector. Haast gave a list of people to invite to Mary, but she did not send an invitation to the Travers, causing a serious rift between the 2 men. And I can't help thinking that Mary was probably entirely unrepentant about it. Oh, sorry, and there's the photo. It's only a tiny photo, and I can't find where the original is, but there's the poor Travers family who were not well liked in Christchurch. Probably didn't come from the right background. So further evidence of Mary's independent thinking can be found in a letter that she wrote to her aunt Sophia Dobson Collett in 1876. In this she wrote about how difficult she and Julius found it to know how to do the best for their children with regards to religion. And she wrote, "I could not bring them up in the old Orthodox church way. There is so much that is repugnant to one's feelings. But on the other hand, I do not think it is right not to have some definite form of religion. At present, I take the boys to the German church, as I think that it is the least objectionable of the places of worship here." So it's pretty different thinking for the time. Mary's aunt, Sophia, lived in London, and she was a feminist free thinker and is known for that. And likewise, Mary's musical friend, Julia Wilding, was an enthusiastic supporter of women's rights. It seems that Mary supported her friend's ideas, but I've not found any evidence that she was active in this area, although her daughter Eva signed the women's suffrage petition in 1893. And Mary didn't sign it, but for reasons that I'll go into shortly. In May 1885, Julius was appointed as New Zealand's Commissioner in charge of exhibits at the New Zealand exhibits at the 1886 International Calendaries exhibition in London. And Julius and Mary began planning to go to Europe for a year. And I think these photos were probably taken not long before they left. Oh. Things are going from bad to worse, aren't they? Oh, here we go. And as you can see, the 20-year age difference is now starting to become just a little bit more apparent. So 19-year-old George, the second son, who had shown talent for painting and drawing, he was to accompany his parents so that he could study at Dusseldorf with Adolf Schill, a well-known artist and architect. Eva, who was 15, would be sent to boarding school at Bonn, close to Haast's widowed sister, Veronica. And I think this is probably Eva. There is a whole lot of unnamed photos in the Haast family collection, but I'm reasonably happy that this is Eva. Mary's parents would look after Heinrich, who was 22 years old and working as a clerk for Wilding and Lewis, along with Leo and Hermann, who were both still at school. Latimer House was given up, and the family's departure from the house would prove to be the last time they were all together, although of course they did not know this at the time. The Haast left on the 12th of January 1886 for London via Rio de Janeiro. And from England, the family went to Europe, where George went to Dusseldorf and Eva to Fraulein Stricker's school in Bonn. Mary wrote that Eva was very sad about it at first, and I quite dreaded the parting from her. I went on Saturday morning to say goodbye, but she was very good and tried to hide her tears. And I'm sure after a few days she'll be quite happy. Then it was back to London, which Mary described as a cheerless place, where they rented rooms in Kensington. And I managed to find, thanks to Google Maps, a photograph of where they rented rooms in Kensington. So they had rooms in the building that has the red door. Julius was extremely busy with the exhibition, and Mary was glad to have a beautiful piano, which they'd also rented, and she intended to play a great deal. It is quite a companion to me now that I am alone so much. But gradually Mary warmed to London, and a few months later said, I begin to feel as if I shall be quite sorry to leave it. There's a great deal that I enjoy in London very much, but I think I shall be very glad when I get back to New Zealand again. It's very lonely for me being here by myself, especially as Papa is so busy always. She always called Haast Papa to the children. Still, it is a very great advantage to be here, and if I only had you all with me, I should be perfectly happy. Mary's letters to her children show she was extremely interested in the world around her and was fascinated by historic places and with natural history. She wrote on more adult matters to Heinrich, while her letters to her younger children contain encouragement to continue practicing their music and also to improve their writing. For example, Mary wrote to Hermann, I wish, dear Hermann, that you would try and write a little better. I saw a letter from little Nan the other day, and her writing is really a great deal better than yours, although she is so much younger. And she does spend quite a lot of time encouraging her children to do better. Although Mary missed Julius's company, it was not long before she was busy visiting friends and acquaintances and going to opera and concerts. And in July, she wrote to Hermann that she had no time to practice the piano. Julius was a great favourite wherever he went and was friendly with the Prince of Wales. At the end of June 1886, Julius received a very important letter, as he described it to his daughter Eva. The first news I received was this morning, finding on my table a letter from the Prince of Wales announcing the fact. I, of course, went at once to Mother, who was still in bed, telling her that she was now Lady von Haast. Of course, she thought I was chaffing her. She was very pleased for my sake, but does not care much about it herself. Though he'd been awarded a knighthood, so he was now Sir Julius von Haast. Mary wrote with the news to Heinrich, it will take some time to get used to being called Lady von Haast, but I suppose I shall get accustomed to it by and by. And this was followed by more encouragement for her sons. I hope that this new distinction that your father has gained will be an additional incentive to all of you to keep up the good name he has made for you and to follow in his footsteps. In early December, Mary went to Dusseldorf and then to Bonn to collect Eva. And it's evident from her letters to Julius that her love for him had in no way diminished over time. Mary counts the days until she will see him again and closes her letters with, Goodbye, my dear husband, ever your loving wife, Mary. Once Julius had joined her, the couple travelled through Europe, visiting friends and museum colleagues. In Florence, Mary began to learn Italian. And then the couple moved on to Vienna, where they stayed with Georgiana, the widow of Julius's great friend, Ferdinand von Haast. This friendship would be very important to Mary in years to come. And then it was back to London, where Mary wrote to her sons, "In less than a fortnight after you receive this, we hope to be once more with you. Yesterday we went to buy a piano, but there was none of the kind that we wanted in the warehouse, so we have to wait a few more days till one arrives from Berlin. Goodbye, my dear boys. Always your loving mother, Mary von Haast." Finally, on the 18th of July 1887, after 16 months away, Mary, Julius and their daughter Eva arrived back in New Zealand. Without a home to go to, they lodged at St Elmo House on Worcester Street, opposite Mary's parents' house, which is where the boys were. This is an advertisement for St Elmo House. Julius went straight back to work, but he was not a well man and died during the night of the 16th of August, just a month after arriving back in Christchurch. Although Julius had been unwell in Europe, mostly due to overwork, Mary no doubt expected that the voyage and the return to New Zealand would restore his health. I don't need to tell you how devastated Mary and her children would have been to lose their kind and jovial husband and father. Mary had been looking forward to making a comfortable house for the family, to having Julius home more often, and for having the time to enjoy the local scene together. And I imagine that she probably felt quite robbed by his death. Unfortunately, the family was left financially devastated as well. Apart from his medals, diplomas, manuscripts, and correspondence, which he left to his eldest son Heinrich, Haast left his estate to his dear wife, Mary Haast. Left with almost nothing, Mary made the decision to sell some very superior household furniture and effects, and this presumably provided her with some money. So Haast, it appears, had made several unwise investments, and some of the property he did have turned out to be really worth nothing. So Mary didn't have anything to live on. On the 8th of September, a meeting of Christchurch residents who wished to create a memorial to Haast resolved to establish a scholarship or prize for science at the University of New Zealand. As Lady von Haast had been left, as they described it, very slenderly provided for, it was proposed that initially the interest on the amount that was subscribed would be given to Mary to provide her with a small income that would supplement whatever she was able to earn teaching music. The committee expected she would need the income for a few years, but not more than 7. It is evident that Mary was struggling. A couple of months later, Mary was described as not well enough to receive pupils. And as she needed a complete change, she was going to stay with her brother, Robert, in Napier for a month or two. She returned in February 1888, but from then appears to have been in seclusion, perhaps with her sister Caroline Todhunter in Merivale, or with her friend Mrs. Wilson, or even at a nursing home. In 1890, Haast's friend William Young wrote to another friend saying, "I was very concerned to read what you mentioned of poor Lady Haast. The last I would have thought to suffer from mental aberration. I hope she has returned to her right mind." In 1893, Mary suffered another calamity when her brother Robert, who she'd been to stay with recently, died suddenly in Napier. Mary and her sister Caroline went to Napier, but after their return, nothing is heard of Mary again until mid-1895, when she organised the sale of most of her property, including high-class rare china, cutlery, carpets, curtains, what are described as mulberry mats, paintings by John Gully, and Haast's personal library. Mary had evidently decided to quit New Zealand. On 25th of November 1895, she wrote from Upper Riccarton at the home of Mrs. Sibylla Wilson, the widow of Archdeacon Wilson, requesting a passport, saying she intended to travel to Europe. And astonishingly, within 3 weeks, she had received it. And that was no fee for that either. Mary may have been invited to Vienna by Georgiana, the widow of Haast's friend Ferdinand von Haast, as the pair had become firm friends when Mary visited Vienna just nearly 10 years earlier. Mary left New Zealand in February and then went to Melbourne, where she got on the Oldenburg Strait, which was going straight to Genoa. When Mary left New Zealand, she appears to have started her life anew, and she was never to return. She was in Vienna by October when she had this photograph taken, and she looks very well. And she dedicated that photo, she wrote an inscription on the back to her friend Georgiana. After Vienna, she spent some months at Bucharest and then moved to Ragaz before returning to, and I've had some fun trying to find photographs of the places that she went as they looked at about the time she was there. So, she was having a lovely time. Letters from this period of Mary's life have so far not been located, but some of her travels were reported in New Zealand newspapers. In Europe, she visited old friends from Christchurch. There was a real society in the UK and in Europe of people who had been in Canterbury but were now back in Europe. So this included... She visited people in Rome, Leipzig, and in London, so including her friend Caroline Chevalier, who was an artist whose husband had painted the painting I showed you earlier. She also organised for a suitable plinth to be made for the bust of her husband, which was on display at Canterbury Museum. And the plinth was designed by Professor Coopers of Bonn, who'd also, I think, designed the bust. And it was actually made in Christchurch. So there's an early photo of it in one of the display galleries at the museum. In June 1900, Mary arrived in London to stay with her son Heinrich in Chelsea, and he had come to London to study law. The correspondent described Lady Mary von Haast as being in splendid health and looked younger and stronger than she did on her last visit to London. Mary and Julius's first grandchild, Julius Henry, was born at Bournemouth a week earlier. However, no visit is mentioned, and there appears to have been some sort of estrangement between Mary and her second son, George. In 1898, George had married Maud Young, the daughter of Dr. Henry Young of Bournemouth, who owned large cattle ranches near Montevideo in Uruguay. Heinrich was his brother's best man, but the attendance of Lady Mary at the wedding is not noted. But then Mary was back in Europe, spending the winter in Siedliska, another village in southern Poland. Over the following years, she visited Lithuania, Russia, what is now Latvia, Poland, Serbia, Austria, and Italy. And during one long winter in Poland, she learned lace making, and it seems that she was always trying something new. In the summer, Mary would usually visit England to see Heinrich and visit old friends such as Samuel Butler, Canon and Mrs. Stack, who had previously been at Tuahiwi in Canterbury, and J.D. Ennis of Castle who was now in Cornwall, back in his family home. Mary's base was in Vienna, and it was here that a bust of Mary was made by a sculptress who was said to have been a pupil of Auguste Rodin. The bust was with Heinrich in Wellington by 1911, when it was included in an exhibition at the New Zealand Academy of Fine Arts. It was said to be the most beautiful thing in the room. The face showed strong character, and the head was finely poised and noble-featured. The rippled hair turned back with a low, broad brow and half covered by a sort of mantilla that melts into the shoulder draperies. And unfortunately, the current location of this bust is unknown, but I feel that it must still exist somewhere. So watch this space. Mary's great friend, Georgiana von Hochstetter, died in 1905, and it was Mary who was with Georgiana who sent the news to London. This was a momentous change in Mary's life, as it appears that Georgiana had been her anchor, and Mary's children were spread across the globe. Mary's eldest son, Heinrich, was in London and studying law, and he married Australian-born Mary Leishman in 1899, and he later returned to New Zealand and lived in Wellington. The second son, George, after completing his studies with Adolf Schill in Dusseldorf, he went to England where, as I mentioned, he married Maud Young, Maud young, possibly causing his mother's disapproval. After their honeymoon in Europe, the couple settled into a house at Kensington, where George had a studio. The next son, Leo, had found work in a gold dredging operation in central Otago, which is probably not really what his father had imagined for him, but I think that there just wasn't any money. In 1900, he married Lena Alu, a half-Chinese New Zealander, and the couple had 2 daughters, who presumably never met Mary, as the couple did not leave New Zealand. Eva, Mary's only daughter, doesn't appear to have gone to Europe after her mother's departure. She didn't marry, but had a busy life looking after her grandparents, visiting relatives, and spending time in the outdoors. She graduated from Canterbury College with a BA and was on the council of the Graduates Association. She was described as a capable and cool-headed climber in a report of a night she spent fog-bound on her own on the slopes of Mount Somers. But Eva suffered from depression and insomnia, and later practically lived with her aunt Caroline Todhunter, who was trying to help her. Eva was under medical supervision when she committed suicide by overdose at her aunt's place in March 1909. She had recently had a breakdown, and while she had recovered, she was terrified of a reoccurrence and of being sent to a nursing home or other place. And this fear may have been the result of her mother's experience after her father's death. Mary had a memorial window made in London for Eva, and this was sent to New Zealand. It was installed in 1911 in the Holy Trinity Church at Avonside, where all of Mary and Julius's children had been baptised. And I managed to find a photograph of this window. I was so pleased because the church is no longer there. And one side represented the Good Shepherd and the other the parable of the sower, while the lower panels contained a representation of youth ministering to age. The lettering says, "To the glory of God and in loving memory of Eva Veronica, only daughter of Julius and Mary von Haast, born 25th of February 1871, died 30th of March 1909. And the epitaph, or the final words, are, "She did what she could," which I still to get to the bottom of. After Eva's death, Mary wrote a new will, which included provision for 3 of her sons, but not George. Mary's youngest son, Hermann, went to Central Otago like his brother and also worked on gold dredges. In 1902, he married Queenstown woman Margaret Gudgeon, and after the marriage, the pair went to London, presumably to see Mary, before going to work in Burma for a gold dredging company. By 1906, Hermann and Margaret were in Alberta, Canada, developing a homestead near the newly established town of Vermilion. And here is Vermilion at about the time that they were there. Mary visited the couple in Canada, and she was interviewed by the local paper, which provides a delightful description of her. As you can see, the visit of Lady Mary von Haast was probably the biggest thing that had happened there for a while. They said that Lady von Haast of Vienna had the charming accent and voice of an English gentlewoman, with the animation of a Viennese and the practical viewpoint of a Canadian. And the interviewer was not surprised to find she had colonial experience in New Zealand. After her visit to Canada, Mary continued her travels around Europe. And in 1912, along with her son Heinrich and his wife, she made a leisurely tour of the Italian Lake District in Genoa before going to Palermo in Sicily to spend the winter. I'm quite envious of some of this travel. And in spring, Mary was on her way to Vienna via Rome, and George took the opportunity to visit. This may have been to make amends. George's wife had died in 1910, and in January 1913, George was meant to marry widow Beryl Dodgson, the daughter of Colonel Shelley Leigh Hunt. But despite the impending wedding being announced in the newspapers, the wedding did not actually take place, and he would later marry someone else a few years later. Mary became ill while George was in Rome, or maybe just before he got there, and she died on the 27th of July 1913 with George by her side. She was 69 years of age, and she was remembered in New Zealand newspapers as a woman of strong character and wide culture. Despite the fact that Heinrich wrote that Mary had to supplement her small income by acting as a companion in Europe, Mary was actually quite wealthy when she died. She left an estate worth over £8,500. This is more than $1 million in today's money. She may well have been a canny investor and certainly held a large number of shares at the time of her death. She had also inherited money from her daughter Eva, but this poses another mystery. How did Eva come to have an estate worth £3,000? On the 2nd of July, just under 4 weeks before her death, Mary had written a new will which left all of her estate to her eldest son Heinrich. If he predeceased her, then it went to his wife Mary, and if they both predeceased her, the estate was to divide equally between Leo and Hermann. Again, nothing for George. Heinrich was now the glue that held the family together, although George was never to be brought back into the fold. After Mary's estate was settled, Heinrich set up the von Haast Trust Fund with a deposit of £2,000, the income being distributed to Leo and Hermann. Unusually for the time, Julius and Mary's children had few children themselves. The 5 surviving children only produced 3 grandchildren. So this is in the order of death date. So Eva Veronica died in 1909 in Christchurch at 38, and she had no issue. Hermann died in 1941 in Whanganui, and he had no issue. Heinrich died in 1953, and he had no issue. George, he died in 1954. He had 1 son and 1 grandson. And James Leopold, he died in Melbourne, and he had 2 daughters, and there are at least 3 grandchildren of that, from that family. There may be more. It was a little confusing. But my final slide concerns the cast-out son, George, and his grandson. George and his second wife, they were both artists, and they were in Bournemouth until the outbreak of World War II, when they shifted to Cornwall. George's son, Julius Henry, dropped the name von Haast after the outbreak of World War II, for obvious reasons, and he used his mother's maiden name of Young. His son, Robert Charles, who's you can see in this photograph looking quite similar to Haast, was born in 1936, and in his birth notice in the Times, he is named as Robert Charles von Haast, but he was not known by that name again until his death notice, also in the Times in 2014, which gave his name as Robert Charles Young, née von Haast, which is really interesting. So in summary, despite the fact that Mary von Haast has almost disappeared from public memory, it is apparent that at the time she did not live in her husband's shadow. Her great love was music, and she was an accomplished pianist who hosted and encouraged other musicians during the couple's time in Christchurch. She was the mother of 5 surviving children, of whom she had high expectations. She was firm and encouraging to them, but it appears likely that her relationship with at least some of her children was complicated. She obviously loved to travel, and her letters from Europe in the 1880s show that she was extremely interested in the world around her, and she was certainly a lifelong learner. She could speak French and German fluently and was described as a good Italian scholar. The words most frequently used to describe Mary always include strong character, and my impression is that Mary felt strongly about things. She loved her husband with a passion, and she was unrelenting when her son let her down. She had the life that she wanted to with Julius and her children, but with Julius's death, that was shattered. But she recovered and went on to not have the last page of her talk. But she went on to make herself the kind of life that she wanted. So she travelled, she spent a lot of time with music, she had great friendships, and I feel that she kind of had these 2 lives, which is why I titled that, my talk that. And I'm sure I had something very erudite and nice to sum up with, but I'm really sorry I can't remember what it was now. So thank you. There we go. And that is Mary von Haast's signature. So thank you for listening so attentively, and I'm happy to take any questions.